Hello, history buffs. Welcome back to my channel, Historical USA. Here, we discover the people, places, and events that made America. I am your host, historian Lisa Weekland, and today we are visiting another colony on our list, and that is the teeny tiny colony of Rhode Island. Now, Rhode Island, much like Boston, was notorious for, you guessed it, smuggling. I think any colony that had a port had issues with smuggling. Let's just put it that way. And for a decade, an entire generation really, Rhode Island, like Massachusetts, like New Hampshire, turned a blind eye to regulations and laws that they deemed unfair. And before you think I am facetious or saying that the colonists defiantly were doing these things, I don't think I've ever explained that Parliament was in on all of it, that Parliament knew exactly what was happening, and they allowed it to happen. Unofficially, this policy would become known as salutary neglect, and it was a mutually beneficial policy, at least for a time. See, the benefits that Britain got from salutary neglect were that the colonies provided raw materials such as tobacco, sugar, and timber, which were vital and essential for British industry. And by allowing the colonies some autonomy, Britain ensured a steady supply of these resources without the cost of heavy administration. Also, by not micromanaging the colonies, Britain could focus on larger geopolitical threats and conflicts in Europe and elsewhere. The colonies were relatively self-sufficient, which allowed Britain to allocate resources where they needed them most. And when you have enemies like France and Spain, they really needed to allocate resources a lot of the time somewhere else. And under salutary neglect, the colonies prospered. And this prospering made them more loyal to Britain. At least that's what Prime Minister Robert Walpole believed. If you could keep your colonies happy and prosperous, they were less likely to rebel, ensuring stability in British-controlled territories. Now, there were a lot of benefits for the colonies as well. The colonies were able to develop their own economies, trade with other nations, and establish local businesses. This economic freedom led to the growth of a robust colonial economy. The lax enforcement of British laws allowed the colonies to develop their own legislative and judicial systems. This experience in self-government, however, laid the foundation for American political institutions and increased the colonists' sense of autonomy and identity. With less interference from Britain, the colonies were able to develop their own culture and social practices, leading to a unique American identity. However, as I've kind of been saying all along, especially if you watched my last season on the French and Indian War, this mutually beneficial relationship began to deteriorate when Britain started to enforce the stricter control and taxation after the heavy debts they incurred during the 7 Years' War and largely the French and Indian War. The shift from salutary neglect to a more direct control really contributed to the growing tension and eventually led to the American Revolution. Now let's get back to the Gaspee Affair. Now, Rhode Island had quite the reputation for trade. Its bustling ports and seafaring expertise thrived on trade, legal and otherwise. Smuggling was rampant, and when the Stamp Act of 1765 sought to tax the colonies, well, Rhode Island was among the first to oppose it vehemently. See, when the Stamp Act was issued, Rhode Island's governor was the future signer of the Declaration of Independence, Stephen Hopkins, and he wrote a pamphlet titled Rights of the Colonies Examined. He criticized Parliament for passing a law that not only hurt colonial merchants, but also the British merchants as well. Hopkins asked why Parliament would pass such a law, quote, to cramp the trade and ruin the interests of many of the colonies, and at the same time lessen in prestigious manner the consumption of the British manufacturers in them. As historian Robert Metcalf wrote, Rhode Island smuggling was as much a way of life as its seafaring tradition. And none of these acts, these laws and regulations passed would stop the smuggling. Enter the British customs ship Gaspee. Now, I keep wanting to say Gaspee because I think it sounds a little more French, a little more maritime, but it's actually called Gaspee. And the Gaspee was commanded by Lieutenant William Duddingston, and he was tasked with enforcing trade regulations and curbing all of that smuggling. Now, the Gaspee was not loved by the locals. In fact, they found the Gaspee was a threat to them, and tensions reached a boiling point when the Gaspee encountered the American merchant sloop Fortune. While patrolling near Rhode Island, the Gaspee engaged with the Fortune, sparking a series of confrontations. And ultimately, Duddingston would commandeer the Fortune for himself, turning it into a British royal sloop, much like what happened with John Hancock's ship during the whole Liberty Affair. And if you haven't watched that video, I really highly suggest you go watch that video. I will link it down below or up here in the corner, whichever corner that is. But the real drama really unfolded when the Gaspee pursued another vessel, the Hannah, captained by Benjamin Lindsay, a man who had quite a bit of reputation as an alleged smuggler himself. In June of 1772, as the Gaspee chased the Hannah, it ran aground near Namquet Point, just off Rhode Island. And this was the moment the Sons of Liberty had been waiting for. Yes, the Sons of Liberty were in Rhode Island too. Now, under the cover of darkness, a group of Rhode Island patriots, led by prominent local leaders, one of them being Abraham Whipple, who would go on to be a commander in the Continental Navy, attacked the stranded Gaspee. They captured the crew, shot and wounded Duddingston, and set the ship ablaze, turning it into a burning symbol of colonial defiance. Historian Joseph J. Ellis wrote, "The destruction of the Gaspee was an audacious act of rebellion, a declaration of colonial independence." Now, the aftermath was a chaotic scene. The Rhode Island governor declared the burning of the Gaspee a crime against the crown and offered a 100-pound reward for the arrest of those responsible. The British response was swift and stern. King George even issued a royal proclamation of his own, condemning the act and ordering a commission of inquiry. The Royal Navy would establish a commission to investigate the incidents and bring those found responsible to justice. But despite the investigation and the efforts to identify the perpetrators, no one was ever arrested for the Gaspee's destruction. The incident, however, fueled colonial anger and further united the colonies against British rule. Historian David H. Fisher writes that the Gaspee Affair was a catalyst for colonial unity and resistance, paving the way for the American Revolution. Today, the Gaspee Affair remains a critical moment in American history and a precursor to the larger struggle for independence. It exemplifies the growing resistance and the courage of those who stood against oppression. I hope you've enjoyed our little detour around the other colonies. I think it is important that you understand that this fight for independence really was not a response to the events in Boston alone, but that each of these colonies were having to deal with injustices, royal mandates, and some pretty hard-nosed British officials of their own. And it's pretty clear that the Gaspee is not going to be the only maritime incident that we're going to see. Now, in the next episode, we are going to discuss the Boston Tea Party. So I hope you're ready for that. And I want to thank you guys so much for watching my short little video today. But I felt like it was important to talk about the Gaspee Affair, the Gaspee Affair. I really want to call it the Gaspee. Does anybody else want to call it the Gaspee? I really want to call it the Gaspee, but it's Gaspee. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. Please give this video a thumbs up. That helps me so much in the algorithm. Share with a friend. If you are a Rhode Islander, did I miss something that you know of that I don't know? I've never been to Rhode Island. I'd love to go see the area where the Gaspee was set ablaze. But let me know down in the comments below. And I personally want to thank our Patreon members. Without your guys' contributions, I cannot do what I do. So I truly appreciate you guys so much. I'm so thankful for you. If you would like to support me on Patreon, you can go and visit my link down in the description bar, and we would love to have you over there. Now I will see you in the next video. Bye.